excited to have you here today because we're going to talk about something that might sound a bit crazy at first. But trust me, it's going to change the way you think about learning English forever. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by the idea of learning thousands and thousands of English words and phrases? Have you ever wondered if there's a simpler way to become fluent without spending years memorizing vocabulary lists? Well, what if I told you that you could speak English fluently with just 303 sentences? Yes, you heard that right. Just 303 sentences. Now, I know what you're thinking. How is that even possible? English has millions of words, thousands of grammar rules, and endless expressions. How can anyone become fluent with such a small number of sentences? That's exactly what we're going to explore today, and by the end of this episode, you'll understand not only how it's possible, but also how you can start using this method right away to improve your English speaking skills dramatically. Before we dive into the details, let me ask you something. When you think about speaking English fluently, what comes to your mind? Do you imagine yourself knowing every single word in the dictionary? Do you picture yourself understanding every idiom, every slang term, every regional expression? Most English learners think that fluency means knowing everything about the language, but that's actually not true at all. Fluency is not about knowing everything. Fluency is about being able to communicate effectively, naturally, and confidently in most everyday situations. And here's the secret that many language teachers don't tell you. Native English speakers don't use all the words in the English language either. In fact, studies have shown that native speakers use a surprisingly small number of words and sentence patterns in their daily conversations. Research indicates that about 80% of everyday English communication uses only about 1,000 to 3,000 words. Even more interesting is that we tend to use the same sentence structures over and over again. We just change a few words here and there to express different ideas. So let's talk about this concept of 303 sentences. Where does this number come from, and why is it so powerful? The idea is based on something called high-frequency patterns. These are sentence structures that appear again and again in English conversations. When you master these core sentence patterns, you can create thousands of different sentences just by swapping out a few words. Think of it like building with blocks. If you have 303 different types of blocks, you can build countless different structures. The blocks are your sentence patterns, and the structures you build are your conversations. Let me give you a simple example to show you what I mean. Take this basic sentence pattern. I want to, followed by a verb. This is just one pattern, but look at how many different things you can say with it. I want to eat. I want to sleep. I want to learn. I want to travel. I want to work. I want to study. I want to practice. I want to improve. I want to understand. I want to speak. You see? One pattern, but endless possibilities. And this is just the beginning. Now, let's think about another common pattern. I'm going to, followed by a verb. Again, this opens up so many possibilities. I'm going to the store. I'm going to work. I'm going to school. I'm going to the gym. I'm going to the park. I'm going to the movies. I'm going to a restaurant. I'm going to my friend's house. I'm going to the doctor. I'm going to the bank. With just these 2 patterns, you can already express many of your daily intentions and plans. But we're just getting started. The beauty of this method is that once you internalize these patterns, they become automatic. You don't have to think about grammar rules or worry about making mistakes. The patterns flow naturally because you've practiced them so many times that they've become part of your muscle memory. It's like learning to ride a bicycle. At first, you have to think about every movement, but once you've practiced enough, you just do it without thinking. Let me share with you some of the most important sentence patterns that make up these 303 sentences. First, we have patterns for expressing needs and wants. We already mentioned I want to, but there are others like I need to, I'd like to, I have to, and I should. These patterns help you express what you need or want to do in different situations. For example, I need to finish this project by Friday. Or, I'd like to order the chicken, please. Or, I have to wake up early tomorrow. Or, I should exercise more often. Each of these patterns has a slightly different meaning and level of urgency or politeness, but they all follow a similar structure. Once you know these patterns, you can use them in countless situations. Next, we have patterns for talking about the present, past, and future. For the present, we use patterns like I am, I do, I have, and I can. For example, I am a teacher. I do yoga every morning. I have 2 brothers. I can speak 3 languages. For the past, we use patterns like I was, I did, I had, and I could. For example, I was tired yesterday. I did my homework last night. I had a great time at the party. I could swim when I was 5 years old. For the future, we use patterns like I will, I'm going to, I'll be, and I'm planning to. For example, I will call you tomorrow. I'm going to start a new job next month. I'll be there in 10 minutes. I'm planning to visit Japan next year. These time-related patterns are essential because they allow you to talk about your experiences, your current situation, and your plans. Another crucial category of patterns involves asking questions. Questions are so important in conversations because they help you gather information, show interest in others, and keep the conversation flowing. Some of the most common question patterns include what, where, when, why, how, and who questions. For example, what do you do? Where are you from? When did you arrive? Why did you choose this? How do you feel? Who is your favorite author? These question patterns are incredibly versatile. You can use them in almost any conversation, whether you're meeting someone new, asking for directions, or having a deep discussion with a friend. The key is to practice these patterns until they become second nature. Now let's talk about patterns for expressing opinions and feelings. These are essential for having meaningful conversations and connecting with people on a deeper level. Some common patterns include I think, I believe, I feel, in my opinion, and it seems to me. For example, I think this movie is really interesting. I believe everyone should have access to education. I feel happy when I'm with my family. In my opinion, learning languages opens many doors. It seems to me that technology is changing too fast. These patterns allow you to share your thoughts and feelings in a clear and natural way. They also show that you're engaged in the conversation and have something valuable to contribute. We also need patterns for making suggestions and giving advice. These are useful when you're helping someone solve a problem or when you're planning activities with friends. Common patterns include why don't you? You should. You could. How about? And let's. For example, why don't you try this restaurant? You should see a doctor if you're not feeling well. You could take the bus instead of driving. How about we meet at 6 o'clock? Let's go for a walk in the park. These patterns make you sound helpful and friendly, and they're essential for building good relationships with others. Another important category is patterns for agreeing and disagreeing. In conversations, you often need to show whether you agree with what someone is saying or if you have a different opinion. Some patterns for agreeing include I agree, that's true, exactly, you're right, and I think so too. For example, I agree with your point about climate change. That's true, we do need more time. Exactly. That's what I was thinking. You're right, this is a difficult situation. I think so too. We should start earlier. For disagreeing politely, you can use patterns like, I'm not sure about that. I see what you mean, but I don't think. Actually, and I have a different opinion. For example, I'm not sure about that approach. I see what you mean, but I think there's another way. I don't think that's the best solution. Actually, the meeting is on Tuesday, not Wednesday. I have a different opinion on this matter. Learning to agree and disagree politely is crucial for maintaining good relationships while still expressing your own views. Let's also discuss patterns for making requests and asking for permission. These are essential for everyday interactions, whether you're at work, at home, or in public places. Common patterns include can you, could you, would you mind, may I, and is it okay if? For example, can you help me with this? Could you pass me the salt, please? Would you mind closing the window? May I use your phone? Is it okay if I sit here? These patterns show politeness and respect, which are important in English-speaking cultures. The difference between can you and could you, or may I, is often about the level of formality. Could you and may I are generally more polite and formal than can you. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Once you have these basic patterns down, you can start combining them to create more complex sentences. This is where the magic happens. For example, You can combine a time expression with an action. Yesterday, I went to the store and bought some groceries. Or you can combine an opinion with a reason. I think we should leave early because the traffic will be bad. Or you can combine a question with a suggestion. What do you think about going to the beach this weekend? By combining patterns, you can express more sophisticated ideas without needing to learn completely new structures. You're just building on what you already know. Let me give you some more examples of how pattern combination works. Let's say you know the pattern "I'm interested in," and you also know how to form questions with "have you ever." You can combine these to have a conversation like this. I'm interested in photography. Have you ever tried it? Or let's say you know I used to, for talking about past habits, and but now, for contrasting with the present. You can say, I used to drink a lot of coffee, but now I prefer tea. Or combine "I'm thinking about" with "because." I'm thinking about changing jobs because I want new challenges. See how these combinations allow you to express complex ideas using simple patterns? This is the power of the 303 sentences method. You're not memorizing 303 separate, unrelated sentences. You're learning 303 patterns and combinations that you can mix and match infinitely. Another crucial aspect of this method is understanding the context in which these patterns are used. The same pattern can have different meanings depending on the situation. For example, "I'm sorry" can be an apology, but it can also be a way to express sympathy. If someone tells you their grandmother passed away, you might say, "I'm sorry to hear that," which is expressing sympathy, not apologizing for something you did. Similarly, "excuse me" can be used to get someone's attention, to apologize for a small mistake, or to politely interrupt someone. Understanding these contextual uses is part of becoming truly fluent. The good news is that as you practice these patterns in different situations, you'll naturally develop this contextual understanding. Let's talk about some specific situations and the patterns you'll need for them. First, let's consider going to a restaurant. What patterns do you need? You need patterns for making reservations. I'd like to make a reservation for 2 people at 7 o'clock. You need patterns for ordering. I'll have the grilled salmon, please. Could I get the soup instead of the salad? You need patterns for asking about the menu. What do you recommend? Does this dish contain nuts? Is this spicy? You need patterns for requesting things. Could we have some more water, please? May I have the check? And you need patterns for compliments. This is delicious. The food was excellent. With just these patterns, you can handle almost any restaurant situation confidently. Now let's think about shopping. What patterns do you need? You need patterns for asking about products. Do you have this in a different color? How much does this cost? Is this on sale? You need patterns for trying things on. Can I try this on? Where are the fitting rooms? You need patterns for making decisions. I'll take this one. I'm still thinking about it. I'd like to return this, please. You need patterns for payment. Do you accept credit cards? Can I pay with cash? And you need patterns for asking for help. Excuse me, where can I find the shoes? Could you help me find something? Again, with just a handful of patterns, you can navigate any shopping situation. Let's consider another common situation. Talking about your job or studies. You need patterns for describing what you do. I work as a software engineer. I'm studying medicine at the university. I'm responsible for managing the team. You need patterns for talking about your experience. I've been working here for 3 years. I graduated last year. I have experience in marketing. You need patterns for discussing your goals. I'm hoping to get a promotion. I want to specialize in pediatrics. I'm planning to start my own business. You need patterns for talking about challenges. The most difficult part is meeting deadlines. I find it challenging to balance work and personal life. Sometimes it's stressful, but I enjoy it. These patterns allow you to have professional conversations and network effectively. What about social situations and making friends? You need patterns for introducing yourself. Hi, I'm Sarah. Nice to meet you. I'm from Brazil, but I've been living here for 2 years. You need patterns for showing interest. That's interesting. Tell me more. How did you get into that? What do you like about it? You need patterns for making plans. Would you like to grab coffee sometime? Are you free this weekend? Let's exchange. Numbers. You need patterns for staying in touch. It was great talking to you. Let's keep in touch. I'll send you a message. These social patterns are essential for building relationships and creating a support network in an English-speaking environment. Now, I want to address something important. You might be wondering, if I only learn 303 sentences, won't I sound repetitive? Won't people notice that I'm using the same patterns over and over? This is a great question, and the answer is no. You won't sound repetitive. And here's why. First, as I mentioned earlier, native speakers also use the same patterns repeatedly. That's just how language works. We all rely on high-frequency patterns because they're efficient and effective. Second, even though you're using the same patterns, you're constantly changing the content words, which are the nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs that carry the main meaning. So even if the structure is the same, what you're saying is different every time. Third, as you become more comfortable with these patterns, you'll naturally start to vary them slightly, add connecting words, and develop your own speaking style. The patterns are just the foundation. Your personality and experiences will make your English unique. Let me share with you a powerful technique for learning these patterns effectively. It's called the substitution drill. Here's how it works. You take one pattern, let's say, I'm looking forward to, and you practice it with many different endings. I'm looking forward to the weekend. I'm looking forward to seeing you. I'm looking forward to my vacation. I'm looking forward to the concert. I'm looking forward to trying that restaurant. I'm looking forward to finishing this project. I'm looking forward to the summer. I'm looking forward to learning more. By doing this drill, you're training your brain to use this pattern automatically. You're not translating from your native language. You're thinking directly in English using this pattern. This is what fluency really means, thinking in English patterns rather than translating. Another effective technique is called pattern expansion. You start with a simple pattern and gradually make it more complex. Let's use I like as our starting point. First level, I like coffee. Second level, I really like coffee. Third level, I really like coffee in the morning. Fourth level, I really like coffee in the morning because it helps me wake up. Fifth level, I really like coffee in the morning because it helps me wake up, especially on Mondays. See how we expanded from a simple two-word pattern to a much more detailed sentence. But notice that the core pattern, I like, remained the same. We just added more information around it. This technique helps you develop the ability to speak in longer, more natural sentences without losing the basic structure. Let's talk about pronunciation and intonation, because knowing the patterns is only part of the equation. How you say these sentences is just as important as what you say. English has a rhythm and melody that can be quite different from other languages. In English, we stress certain words in a sentence and reduce others. Usually, we stress the content words like nouns, main verbs, adjectives, and adverbs, and we reduce the function words like articles, prepositions, and auxiliary verbs. For example, in the sentence, I'm going to the store, we would stress going and store, but reduce I'm, to, and the. This creates the characteristic rhythm of English. When you practice your 303 sentences, pay attention to which words are stressed. Listen to native speakers and try to imitate their rhythm and intonation. This will make your English sound much more natural and fluent. Intonation is also crucial. In English, our voice goes up and down to convey meaning and emotion. Generally, our voice rises at the end of yes/no questions. Are you coming to the party? But it falls at the end of statements and information questions. I'm going to the party. Where is the party? Rising intonation can also show uncertainty or that you're not finished speaking, while falling intonation shows certainty and completion. When you're practicing your sentence patterns, don't just focus on the words. Practice the melody of the sentence too. Record yourself and compare your intonation to native speakers. This attention to pronunciation and intonation will dramatically improve how fluent you sound. Now, let's discuss how to actually learn and memorize these 303 sentences. The key is not to try to memorize them all at once. That would be overwhelming and ineffective. Instead, you should learn them gradually, in categories, and with lots of practice. Start with the most essential patterns, the ones you'll use every single day. These might include patterns for greetings, introducing yourself, expressing basic needs, and asking simple questions. Once you're comfortable with these, move on to the next category. Maybe patterns for talking about your daily routine, your likes and dislikes, and your past experiences. Then continue to more advanced patterns for expressing opinions, making suggestions, and having deeper conversations. The most important thing is to practice these patterns in context, not in isolation. Don't just repeat "I want to" 50 times. Instead, think about real situations where you would use this pattern and practice complete, meaningful sentences. Even better, try to use these patterns in actual conversations. This is called communicative practice, and it's the most effective way to internalize language patterns. If you don't have English-speaking friends to practice with, you can practice with yourself. Yes, I'm serious. Talk to yourself in English. Describe what you're doing, what you're thinking, what you're planning. Use your sentence patterns to narrate your life. This might feel strange at first, but it's incredibly effective. Another powerful learning strategy is to keep a pattern journal. Every day, choose 1 or 2 patterns to focus on. Write them down in your journal, and then write 5 to 10 example sentences using those patterns. Make the sentences personal and relevant to your life. For example, if you're learning the pattern "I'm trying to," you might write, "I'm trying to improve my English." "I'm trying to eat healthier." "I'm trying to save money." "I'm trying to be more patient." "I'm trying to wake up earlier." By making the sentences personal, you're more likely to remember them and use them in real life. At the end of each week, review all the patterns you learned that week. This regular review is essential for moving patterns from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. Let's talk about some common mistakes that English learners make when trying to speak fluently, and how the 303 sentences method helps you avoid these mistakes. One common mistake is trying to translate directly from your native language. This often results in sentences that are grammatically incorrect or sound unnatural in English. When you learn sentence patterns, you're learning to think in English structures rather than translating. Another common mistake is focusing too much on grammar rules and not enough on practical communication. Grammar is important, but if you're constantly thinking about rules while speaking, you'll never achieve fluency. The pattern method helps because you're learning grammar implicitly through examples and practice rather than explicitly through rules. You develop a feel for what sounds right rather than consciously applying rules. A third common mistake is trying to use overly complex vocabulary and structures before mastering the basics. Some learners think that using big words and complicated sentences will make them sound more fluent, but actually, the opposite is true. If you're struggling to form these complex sentences, you'll speak slowly, make mistakes, and sound less fluent. It's much better to use simple patterns confidently and correctly than to stumble through complex structures. The 303 sentences method keeps you focused on high-frequency, practical patterns that will serve you well in most situations. As you master these, you can gradually add more advanced patterns and vocabulary. Let me share with you some specific examples of the 303 sentences. Remember, these aren't just random sentences. They're patterns that you can adapt to countless situations. Here are some examples from different categories. For expressing ability, I can speak English. I can't drive. Can you swim? I could run faster when I was younger. I'll be able to help you tomorrow. For expressing necessity, I have to go now. I must finish this today. Do I need to bring anything? You don't have to worry. We had to wait for an hour. For expressing possibility, it might rain tomorrow. She may be late. That could be a problem. It must be expensive. It can't be true. For expressing preference, I'd rather stay home. I prefer tea to coffee. Would you rather go now or later? I'd prefer not to say. I like this one better. Here are more examples. For talking about experiences, I've been to Paris. Have you ever tried sushi? I've never seen that movie. She's lived here for 10 years. How long have you been studying English? For talking about ongoing actions, I'm working on a project. What are you doing? She's not feeling well. Are they coming to the party? I was watching TV when you called. For talking about habits, I usually wake up at 7. She always drinks coffee in the morning. Do you often go to the gym? I never eat breakfast. We sometimes go out on weekends. For talking about future plans, I'm meeting John tomorrow. What are you doing this weekend? She's starting a new job next month. Are you going to the conference? I'm not working on Friday. Let's continue with more examples. For making comparisons, this is better than that. She's taller than her brother. It's the best restaurant in town. This is as good as the other one. It's not as expensive as I thought. For describing things, it's really beautiful. The weather is nice today. This tastes delicious. That sounds interesting. It looks complicated. For expressing frequency, I go to the gym 3 times a week. How often do you travel? She visits her parents every month. I rarely eat fast food. We meet once a year. For talking about duration, I've been waiting for 30 minutes. How long does it take? The movie lasts 2 hours. I'll be there in 5 minutes. She's been working here since January. More pattern examples for you. For expressing cause and effect. I'm tired because I didn't sleep well. Since it's raining, we should stay inside. The traffic was bad, so I was late. I studied hard, therefore I passed the exam. Due to the weather, the flight was cancelled. For expressing contrast, I like the color, but it's too expensive. Although it was raining, we went out. She's young, however, she's very experienced. Despite the difficulties, we succeeded. It's small, yet it's comfortable. For expressing purpose, I'm saving money to buy a car. She studies hard in order to get good grades. We left early so that we wouldn't be late. I'm calling to confirm my appointment. He exercises to stay healthy. Let's look at patterns for giving examples. For example, you could try this approach. Such as what? Like this one. For instance, yesterday I saw something interesting, including me. For expressing certainty and uncertainty, I'm sure about that. I'm certain she'll come. I'm not sure if I can make it. Maybe we should wait. Perhaps you're right. Definitely. Probably not. I doubt it. For expressing conditions. If it rains, we'll stay home. Unless you hurry, you'll be late. I'll go if you go. Provided that you finish your work, you can leave early. In case you need help, call me. Here are patterns for sequencing and organizing information. First, let me explain the situation. Then we can decide what to do. After that, we'll have lunch. Finally, we'll review everything. Meanwhile, you can start working on the other task. Previously, I worked in a different field. Subsequently, things got better. At the same time, we need to consider other options for adding information. Also, I want to mention something. In addition, there's another point. Furthermore, we should think about the cost. Moreover, it's important to act quickly. Besides, I don't have time. As well as that, we need to consider the risks. Let me give you patterns for summarizing and concluding. In conclusion, I think we should proceed. To sum up, there are 3 main points. Overall, it was a good experience. In short, we need more time. Basically, that's what happened. In general, people are friendly here. On the whole, I'm satisfied with the results. For expressing personal reactions, I'm surprised that you said that. I'm disappointed with the outcome. I'm excited about the opportunity. I'm worried about the situation. I'm confused by the instructions. I'm impressed by your work. I'm frustrated with the delays. Now, let's talk about how to practice these patterns effectively, using different learning styles. If you're a visual learner, you might benefit from writing out the patterns, creating mind maps that show how patterns connect to each other, or using flashcards with the pattern on one side and examples on the other. You could also watch English videos with subtitles and notice when these patterns appear. If you're an auditory learner, you should listen to podcasts, audiobooks, and conversations, paying attention to the patterns you hear. Record yourself practicing the patterns and listen back to check your pronunciation and fluency. You might also benefit from language learning apps that have audio components. If you're a kinesthetic learner, you need to practice through movement and action. Act out conversations, use gestures while speaking, or practice patterns while doing physical activities like walking or exercising. Regardless of your learning style, one of the most effective ways to practice is through shadowing. This is a technique where you listen to a native speaker and try to repeat what they say at the same time, like a shadow. This helps you develop natural rhythm, intonation, and pronunciation. You can shadow podcasts, TV shows, movies, or YouTube videos. Start with slower, clearer speech and gradually work up to faster, more natural conversation. Shadowing is challenging at first, but it's incredibly effective for developing fluency. It trains your mouth muscles to produce English sounds and patterns automatically. Another excellent practice technique is called pattern substitution in context. Here's how it works. You take a short dialogue or story and identify the patterns in it. Then you create your own dialogue or story using the same patterns but with different content. For example, let's say you have this dialogue. A. Where are you going? B. I'm going to the library. A. Why are you going there? B. I need to return some books. Now you create your own version. Ace. Where are you going? B. I'm going to the gym. A. Why are you going there? B. I want to work out. By doing this, you're practicing the patterns in a meaningful context, which helps you remember them and use them naturally. Let's discuss the role of vocabulary in the 303 sentences method. You might be thinking, if I'm focusing on sentence patterns, how do I expand my vocabulary? The answer is that vocabulary and patterns work together. As you practice your patterns, you'll naturally encounter new words. The key is to learn vocabulary in context, not in isolation. Instead of memorizing lists of random words, learn words as they appear in your sentence patterns. For example, when you're practicing the pattern, I'm interested in, you'll learn vocabulary related to hobbies and interests. Photography, cooking, gardening, painting, reading, traveling, and so on. When you're practicing patterns for describing things, you'll learn adjectives: beautiful, ugly, expensive, cheap, comfortable, uncomfortable, modern, old-fashioned. This contextual vocabulary learning is much more effective than memorizing word lists because you're learning how words are actually used. As you progress, you'll want to expand your patterns to include more sophisticated structures. For example, you might start with simple present tense patterns like, I work in an office, and then expand to present perfect patterns like, I've worked in an office for 5 years. Or you might start with simple conditionals like, if it rains, I'll stay home, and then expand to more complex conditionals like, if I had known about the traffic, I would have left earlier. The beauty of the pattern method is that it's scalable. You can start with basic patterns and gradually add more advanced ones as your confidence and ability grow. You're always building on what you already know, rather than starting from scratch with completely new structures. Let me address a question that many learners have. How long will it take me to learn these 303 sentences and become fluent? The honest answer is that it depends on several factors. How much time you can dedicate to practice each day, your current English level, your native language, and how you practice. However, I can give you some general guidelines. If you're starting from a beginner level and you practice for about 30 minutes to 1 hour every day, you could learn and internalize these patterns in about 6 months to 1 year. If you're already at an intermediate level, you might achieve fluency with these patterns in 3 to 6 months. The key is consistent, daily practice. It's much better to practice for 30 minutes every day than to practice for 3 hours once a week. Language learning requires regular exposure and practice for the patterns to become automatic. Here's a suggested learning schedule that you can adapt to your needs. Week 1 to 4. Focus on the most essential patterns for daily life. These include greetings, introductions, expressing basic needs, asking simple questions, and talking about present actions and habits. Practice these patterns every day until you can use them without thinking. Week 5 to 8. Add patterns for talking about the past and future, expressing likes and dislikes, making requests, and asking for permission. Continue practicing the patterns from weeks 1 to 4 so you use. Don't forget them. Week 9 to 12. Introduce patterns for expressing opinions, making suggestions, agreeing and disagreeing, and describing things. By now, you should be feeling more confident in your ability to have basic conversations. Week 13 to 16. Add more complex patterns for expressing conditions, cause and effect, contrast, and purpose. Start combining patterns to create longer, more sophisticated sentences. Continuing with the schedule. Week 17 to 20. Focus on patterns for specific situations like shopping, dining out, traveling, and professional contexts. Practice role-playing these situations. Week 21 to 24. Work on patterns for expressing emotions, reactions, and more nuanced opinions. Practice having deeper, more meaningful conversations. Week 25 and beyond. Continue expanding your pattern repertoire and focus on fluency, pronunciation, and natural expression. At this point, you should be able to handle most everyday conversations with confidence. Remember, this is just a suggested schedule. You can adjust it based on your needs and progress. The important thing is to be consistent and to practice actively, not just passively. Now, let's talk about some resources you can use to find and practice these sentence patterns. First, there are many excellent English learning websites and apps that focus on common phrases and patterns. Some popular ones include Duolingo, Babbel, and Memories, though you should look for resources that specifically emphasize sentence patterns rather than just vocabulary. Second, you can find pattern lists and exercises in grammar books, but look for books that take a communicative approach rather than a purely theoretical one. Books like English Grammar in Use by Raymond Murphy are excellent because they present grammar through practical examples and exercises. Third, you can learn patterns from authentic materials like podcasts, TV shows, movies, and YouTube videos. Pay attention to how native speakers structure their sentences and try to identify the patterns they use most frequently. Another valuable resource is language exchange partners or conversation tutors. When you practice with a real person, you get immediate feedback and the opportunity to use your patterns in genuine communication. You can find language exchange partners through apps like HelloTalk or Tandem, or you can hire a tutor through platforms like Italki or Preply. When you're practicing with a partner or tutor, ask them to focus on helping you use sentence patterns correctly and naturally. Don't worry too much about making mistakes. Mistakes are a natural part of the learning process, and they actually help you learn. Every time you make a mistake and correct it, you're strengthening the correct pattern in your brain. Let me share some success stories from learners who have used the pattern-based approach to achieve fluency. I know a student from China who struggled with English for years, trying to memorize vocabulary lists and grammar rules. She could read and write fairly well, but she couldn't speak fluently. When she discovered the pattern method, everything changed. She focused on learning and practicing one pattern every day. She would use that pattern in as many different sentences as she could throughout the day. Within 6 months, her speaking ability had improved dramatically. She told me that the key was realizing she didn't need to know everything about English to communicate effectively. She just needed to master the most common patterns and use them confidently. Another student from Brazil had a similar experience. He was preparing for a job interview in English and was very nervous because his speaking skills were weak. He had only 2 months to prepare. Instead of trying to learn everything, he focused on the specific patterns he would need for the interview. Patterns for talking about his experience, his skills, his goals, and his strengths. He practiced these patterns every day, sometimes for hours. He would record himself answering common interview questions and listen back to identify areas for improvement. When the interview day came, he felt prepared and confident. He got the job, and he credits his success to focusing on practical patterns rather than trying to achieve perfect English. I also know a student from Japan who used the pattern method to prepare for studying abroad. She knew she would need to participate in class discussions, give presentations, and write papers in English. She focused on academic patterns like according to, research shows that, in contrast, for example, and in conclusion. She practiced using these patterns to discuss topics in her field of study. When she arrived at her university, she found that she could participate in discussions much more easily than she had expected. Her professors and classmates were impressed by her ability to express complex ideas clearly. She later told me that focusing on patterns gave her a framework for organizing her thoughts in English, which made speaking and writing much less stressful. These success stories illustrate an important point. The 303 sentences method works because it's practical, focused, and achievable. Instead of being overwhelmed by the vastness of the English language, you have a clear, manageable goal. You know exactly what you need to learn, and you can track your progress. This sense of progress is incredibly motivating. Every time you master a new pattern, you can feel yourself getting more fluent. Every time you successfully use a pattern in a real conversation, your confidence grows. This positive feedback loop keeps you motivated and engaged in your learning. Now, I want to talk about the psychological aspects of language learning, because mindset is just as important as method. Many English learners suffer from what's called perfectionism paralysis. They're so afraid of making mistakes that they don't speak at all. They wait until they feel completely ready, until they know all the grammar rules, until their pronunciation is perfect. But here's the truth. You'll never feel completely ready. There will always be more to learn. Fluency doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from using what you know, even if it's imperfect. The 303 sentences method helps overcome perfectionism paralysis because it gives you permission to focus on a limited set of patterns. You don't have to know everything. You just have to know these patterns and use them confidently. Another common psychological barrier is fear of judgment. Many learners are afraid that native speakers will judge them for their mistakes or their accent. While it's true that some people might be impatient or unkind, most native English speakers are actually very supportive of language learners. They appreciate the effort you're making to communicate in their language. Remember, making mistakes is not a sign of failure. It's a sign that you're trying, that you're pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. Every successful language learner has made thousands of mistakes. That's how learning happens. When you focus on using your sentence patterns, you'll make fewer mistakes because you're using structures that you've practiced extensively. And when you do make mistakes, you can correct them and move on without dwelling on them. A third psychological factor is motivation. Learning a language is a long-term commitment, and it's easy to lose motivation along the way. This is why it's important to set clear, achievable goals and to celebrate your progress. The 303 sentences method naturally supports motivation because you can see concrete progress. You can check off patterns as you learn them. You can notice yourself using patterns in conversations that you couldn't use before. You can record yourself speaking at the beginning of your journey and then again after a few months, and hear the dramatic improvement. These tangible signs of progress keep you motivated to continue. Let's talk about some specific strategies for staying motivated. First, connect your English learning to your personal goals and interests. If you love cooking, practice patterns using cooking vocabulary. If you're interested in technology, use examples from that field. When your practice is connected to things you care about, it doesn't feel like work. Second, find a learning community. This could be an online forum, a local conversation group, or even just one study partner. Having people to share your progress with, to practice with, and to encourage you makes a huge difference. Third, reward yourself for reaching milestones. When you master 10 new patterns, treat yourself to something you enjoy. When you have your first successful conversation using your patterns, celebrate. These rewards reinforce your learning and keep you motivated. Fourth, track your progress visually. You could create a chart where you color in a square for each pattern you learn, or keep a journal where you write about your learning experiences. Seeing your progress accumulate over time is incredibly motivating. Fifth, remember your why. Why did you start learning English? Maybe it's for career opportunities, for travel, for education, or for personal growth. Whatever your reason, remind yourself of it regularly, especially when you're feeling discouraged. Your why is your anchor that keeps you committed to your goal. Now let's discuss some advanced techniques for using your 303 sentences in more sophisticated ways. Once you've mastered the basic patterns, you can start to play with them. To add personality and style to your English. One way to do this is through the use of adverbs and adjectives. For example, instead of just saying, "I like this," you can say, "I really like this." "I absolutely love this." Or, "I kind of like this." These small additions change the intensity and nuance of your meaning. Another way to add sophistication is through the use of discourse markers. These are words and phrases like actually, by the way, anyway, I mean, you know, and well. Native speakers use these constantly to organize their thoughts, to change topics, to emphasize points, or to make their speech sound more natural and conversational. For example, instead of saying, "I think we should go now," you might say, "Well, I think we should probably go now." Or instead of, "I don't agree with that," you might say, "Actually, I don't really agree with that." These discourse markers don't change the basic meaning, but they make your English sound much more natural and fluent. As you listen to native speakers, pay attention to how they use these markers and try to incorporate them into your own speech. Another advanced technique is using idiomatic expressions and phrasal verbs. While you don't need to know hundreds of idioms to be fluent, learning a few common ones can make your English more colorful and natural. For example, instead of "I understand," you might say, "I get it." Instead of "I'm very busy," you might say, "I'm swamped." Instead of "let's start," you might say, "let's get started." Phrasal verbs are particularly important in English because native speakers use them constantly. A phrasal verb is a verb combined with a preposition or adverb that creates a new meaning. For example, give up means to quit, look after means to take care of, run into means to meet by chance, and put off means to postpone. Learning common phrasal verbs and incorporating them into your sentence patterns will make your English sound much more natural. For example, instead of "I need to cancel the meeting," you might say, "I need to call off the meeting." Instead of "I met John by chance yesterday," you might say, "I ran into John yesterday." Let's also talk about the importance of listening in developing fluency. You can't become fluent just by studying patterns on paper. You need to hear how these patterns sound in real speech. Listening helps you internalize the rhythm, intonation, and pronunciation of English. It also exposes you to variations of the patterns you're learning and helps you understand how native speakers actually use them. I recommend listening to a variety of English accents and speaking styles. Listen to podcasts, watch movies and TV shows, listen to audiobooks, watch YouTube videos, and if possible, have conversations with native speakers from different countries. The more you listen, the more natural English will sound to you, and the easier it will be to produce it yourself. When you're listening, try to do active listening rather than passive listening. Active listening means you're paying attention and trying to understand, not just having English playing in the background while you do something else. 1. Active listening. Technique is to listen to a short segment, maybe 30 seconds to 1 minute, and then try to repeat what you heard. This is similar to shadowing, but you're repeating after the speaker finishes rather than at the same time. Another technique is to listen for specific patterns. Choose one pattern you're working on, like "I'm going to," and listen for how many times you hear it and in what contexts. This focused listening helps you notice patterns and understand how they're used. Let me give you some tips for improving your pronunciation as you practice your patterns. First, learn the individual sounds of English. English has about 44 distinct sounds, and some of them might not exist in your native language. Spend time learning how to produce these sounds correctly. There are many YouTube videos and apps that can help with this. Second, pay attention to word stress. In English, we stress one syllable in each word more than the others. For example, in the word important, we stress the second syllable, important. Stressing the wrong syllable can make you difficult to understand. Third, practice sentence stress and rhythm, as we discussed earlier. Remember that content words are stressed and function words are reduced. Fourth, work on linking sounds. In natural English speech, words flow together. The end of one word connects to the beginning of the next word. For example, I want to go sounds like I wanna go in casual speech. Did you eat? Sounds like did ya eat? This linking is what makes English sound smooth and natural. When you practice your patterns, try to link the words together rather than pronouncing each word separately. Fifth, record yourself regularly and compare your pronunciation to native speakers. This can be humbling, but it's one of the most effective ways to improve. You'll notice things in your own speech that you wouldn't notice otherwise. Don't be discouraged if you don't sound exactly like a native speaker. The goal is to be clear and understandable, not to eliminate your accent completely. Now, let's address a common concern. What if I'm in a situation where I need to express something that doesn't fit into my learned patterns? This is a valid concern, and the answer has several parts. First, you'll be surprised by how many situations you can handle with just these core patterns. They're more versatile than you might think. Second, when you encounter a situation that requires something new, you can often work around it using the patterns you know. For example, if you don't know how to say, "I'm allergic to peanuts," you might say, "I can't eat peanuts because they make me sick." It's not the exact same meaning, but it communicates the essential information. Third, it's okay to ask for help. You can say, "How do you say?" or "What's the word for?" Native speakers are usually happy to help. Fourth, and most importantly, as you use your core patterns in real situations, you'll naturally encounter new patterns and expressions. You'll hear other people using them, and you'll gradually add them to your repertoire. Language learning is a continuous process. The 303 sentences are your foundation, but you'll keep building on that foundation throughout your life. The difference is that once you have this solid foundation, adding new patterns and expressions becomes much easier. You're not starting from zero. You're adding to a structure that's already strong. Let me share with you a powerful concept called comprehensible input. This term was coined by linguist Stephen Krashen, and it refers to language input that is slightly above your current level, but still understandable. The idea is that you learn best when you're exposed to language that challenges you just a little bit, but doesn't overwhelm you. If the input is too easy, you don't learn anything new. If it's too difficult, you get frustrated and give up. The 303 sentences method naturally creates comprehensible input because you're learning patterns in a logical progression from simple to more complex. Each new pattern builds on what you already know, so it's challenging but not overwhelming. You can apply this concept to your listening and reading practice as well. Choose materials that are slightly above your current level. If you're a beginner, don't try to watch complex movies or read academic articles. Start with simple podcasts, children's books, or graded readers designed for English learners. As you improve, gradually increase the difficulty of your materials. This gradual progression keeps you in the sweet spot of comprehensible input, where learning happens most effectively. You should understand about 70 to 80% of what you're hearing or reading. If you understand less than that, the material is too difficult. If you understand everything, it's too easy. Let's talk about the role of grammar in the 303 sentences method. You might have noticed that I haven't talked much about grammar rules. That's intentional. While grammar is important, focusing too much on rules can actually hinder your fluency. When you're trying to speak, you don't have time to think about whether you should use the present perfect or the past simple, or whether you need a gerund or an infinitive. You need to speak automatically, without conscious thought. The pattern method teaches grammar implicitly. As you practice patterns, you're internalizing grammar rules without having to memorize them explicitly. For example, when you practice the pattern "I've been to," you're learning the present perfect tense. You don't need to know all the rules about when to use present perfect versus past simple. You just need to know that "I've been to Paris" is how you talk about life experiences. That said, some explicit grammar knowledge can be helpful, especially at intermediate and advanced levels. Once you've internalized the basic patterns, you might want to study grammar to understand why certain patterns work the way they do. This deeper understanding can help you use patterns more flexibly and create new combinations. But grammar study should come after pattern practice, not before. First, develop the ability to use patterns automatically. Then, if you're interested, study the grammar behind those patterns. This approach is much more effective than the traditional method of studying grammar rules first and then trying to apply them in speech. I want to emphasize the importance of consistency in your practice. Learning a language is like building muscle. You can't go to the gym once a month for 8 hours and expect to get strong. You need to exercise regularly, even if it's just for a short time each day. The same is true for language learning. 30 minutes of practice every day is much more effective than 3 hours once a week. Daily practice keeps the patterns fresh in your mind and helps them become automatic. It also builds momentum. When you practice every day, you maintain your motivation and you see steady progress. When you practice sporadically, you forget what you learned and you have to keep starting over. How can you fit daily practice into a busy schedule? Here are some ideas. Practice during your commute by listening to English podcasts or by talking to yourself in English. Practice during exercise by describing what you're doing or by listening to English audio. Practice during household chores by narrating your actions in English. Practice before bed by reviewing the patterns you learned that day. Practice during meals by describing the food you're eating. The key is to integrate English practice into your daily routine so that it becomes a habit, not something you have to find extra time for. Even 5 or 10 minutes of practice is valuable if you do it every day. Let's discuss the concept of language chunks. Linguists have found that we don't actually speak word by word. Instead, we speak in chunks, which are groups of words that commonly go together. For example, how are you is a chunk. We don't think how plus are plus you. We think of the whole phrase as one unit. Nice to meet you. I'd like to. On the other hand, as a matter of fact, these are all chunks. The 303 sentences are essentially high-frequency chunks. When you learn them as complete patterns rather than as individual words, you're learning the way language is actually stored and processed in the brain. This is why the pattern method is so effective. You're working with the brain's natural language processing system rather than against it. As you practice your patterns, try to think of them as chunks, as single units of meaning. Don't break them down into individual words. For example, when you practice, I'm looking forward to, think of the whole phrase as one piece, not as I plus am plus looking plus forward plus to. This chunking approach will help you speak more fluently because you're retrieving whole phrases from memory rather than constructing sentences word by word. It's the difference between typing a sentence letter by letter and copying and pasting a pre-written phrase. The second method is much faster and more efficient. Now let's talk about cultural aspects of communication. Language is not just about words and grammar. It's also about cultural norms and expectations. Different cultures have different communication styles, and understanding these differences can help you communicate more effectively in English. For example, In many English-speaking cultures, directness is valued. People tend to say what they mean clearly and explicitly. In some other cultures, indirect communication is preferred, and meaning is conveyed through context and implication. If you come from a culture that values indirect communication, you might need to adjust your style to be more direct when speaking English. Another cultural difference is the use of small talk. In many English-speaking countries, especially the United States and the United Kingdom, small talk is an important part of social interaction. People often start conversations with comments about the weather, sports, or other neutral topics before getting to the main point. This might seem unnecessary if you come from a culture where people get straight to business, but in English-speaking contexts, small talk serves important social functions. It builds rapport, establishes a friendly atmosphere, and shows that you're interested in the other person. Learning patterns for small talk, like, "How's it going?" "Nice weather today." "Did you have a good weekend?" can help you navigate these social situations more comfortably. Politeness conventions also vary across cultures. In English, especially British English, there's a strong emphasis on politeness and avoiding direct commands. Instead of saying, "Give me the salt," you would say, "Could you pass the salt, please?" Instead of, "I want to talk to the manager," you might say, "I'd like to speak with the manager if possible." Learning these polite patterns is essential for making a good impression and avoiding misunderstandings. The good news is that many of the 303 sentences include polite forms. So as you learn the patterns, you're also learning appropriate politeness levels. Let me give you some final thoughts on achieving fluency with the 303 sentences method. First, remember that fluency is a journey, not a destination. You'll never reach a point where you know everything about English. Even native speakers continue to learn new words and expressions throughout their lives. The goal is not perfection. The goal is effective communication and continuous improvement. Second, be patient with yourself. Language learning takes time, and progress is not always linear. You'll have days when you feel like you're improving rapidly, and days when you feel stuck. This is normal. Keep practicing consistently, and you will improve. Third, focus on communication, not on correctness. It's better to speak with some mistakes than to not speak at all, because you're afraid of making mistakes. Fourth, use your English in real situations as much as possible. The patterns you learn are tools, and tools are meant to be used. Find opportunities to speak English, whether it's with native speakers, with other learners, or even with yourself. The more you use your patterns in real communication, the more automatic and fluent they'll become. Fifth, enjoy the process. Learning a language opens up new worlds. It allows you to connect with people from different cultures, to access information and entertainment in English, to travel more confidently, and to expand your career opportunities. Celebrate your progress. Enjoy your successes, and don't be too hard on yourself when things are difficult. The 303. Sentences method is powerful because it's based on how language actually works and how our brains actually learn. Instead of trying to memorize thousands of individual words and dozens of grammar rules, you're learning high-frequency patterns that you can use immediately in real communication. These patterns are the building blocks of fluency. Once you have them, you can express a huge range of ideas, and you can continue to expand your English naturally through use and exposure. You're not trying to learn everything at once. You're building a solid foundation and then adding to it gradually. Think of it this way. If you were learning to build houses, you wouldn't start by trying to build a mansion. You'd start by learning the basic techniques, how to lay a foundation, how to frame walls, how to install a roof. Once you master these basic techniques, you can build many different types of houses. The 303 sentences are like those basic building techniques. They're the fundamental skills you need to construct any conversation. And just as a skilled builder can create beautiful, unique houses using the same basic techniques, you can have rich, interesting conversations using these core patterns. I hope this episode has inspired you and given you a clear path forward in your English learning journey. The idea that you can achieve fluency with just 303 sentences might have seemed impossible at the beginning of this episode, but now you understand how it works. You understand that these aren't just random sentences, but high-frequency patterns that you can adapt to countless situations. You understand that fluency is not about knowing everything, but about using what you know confidently and effectively. You understand that the key is consistent practice, focusing on communication rather than perfection, and gradually building your skills over time. Remember, every fluent English speaker started where you are now. They didn't know these patterns. They made mistakes. They felt frustrated and discouraged at times. But they kept practicing, kept using their English, and gradually became more and more fluent. You can do the same. You have the tools, you have the method, and most importantly, you have the ability. All you need now is to take action. Start today. Choose one pattern and practice it in 10 different sentences. Tomorrow, choose another pattern. Keep going, day by day, pattern by pattern. Before you know it, you'll be speaking English fluently, confidently, and naturally. The journey to fluency is not always easy, but it's absolutely worth it. Every pattern you learn, every conversation you have, every mistake you make and correct brings you one step closer to your goal. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. There are millions of English learners around the world, all working toward the same goal. We're all part of a global community of people who believe in the power of language to connect us, to open doors, and to create opportunities. So keep practicing, keep believing in yourself, and keep moving forward. Your fluent English future is waiting for you, and it starts with these 303 sentences.